I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. At a Senate Rules Committee hearing on Wednesday, Senator Amy Klobuchar discussed the need to reform the Electoral Count Act. The Electoral Count Act was an 1887 law used by former President Trump's legal team to keep him in power after the 2020 election. The Minnesota Democratic senator said that the former president's plan resulted in a, quote, violent mob desecrating our nation's capital. Klobuchar said that this new legislation would make sure that the laws would not be able to be used by anyone of any party, quote, in a way that undercuts the will of the people.
So the Electoral Count Act was passed in 1887, as I noted, in response to the disputed election between Rutherford Hayes and Samuel Tilden, just something that just comes off the lips of everyone at this hearing today. I point this out because it was a whole lot of time ago. And that bill was put in place to govern how Congress, at that time, counts electoral votes for president. While it hasn't gotten much attention in the next 130 years, it became the cornerstone, sadly, of a plan hatched by President Trump and his allies that led to an attempt and this insurrection at the Capitol, where there was a possibility, Senator Blunt and I remember that day well, where the will of the American people could have been overturned. It culminated in a violent mob desecrating our nation's capital. On that dark day, enemies of our democracy sought to exploit the provisions of this antiquated law to subvert the results of a free and fair election. I remember this day well because Senator Blunt and I were the ones at 3:30 in the morning with Vice President Pence that were walking through the broken glass. We had done that walk 13 hours before. It was celebratory. It was amazing. It was a big ceremony. We had a big procession. At the end of the day, it was just us, closed doors, broken windows, glass all over the place, spray-painted columns. But yet our democracy rose again, the inauguration, and we went forward. And part of that is working together to make sure that laws can't be used by anyone of any party, any political persuasion, in a way that undercuts the will of the people. Number one, the claim was made that the Electoral Count Act, as it exists, would allow the Vice President to refuse to accept electoral votes that were lawfully cast. We watched in horror as a mob stormed the Capitol chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," and got within 40 feet of the Vice President of the United States. We know these claims about the Vice President's authority were false, but in the proposals that we have put forward, Senator King and the group, the bipartisan group, make it absolutely clear that the Vice President doesn't have this power. In the days and weeks before the insurrection, they claimed that the law allowed state legislatures to appoint their own electors if they declared a failed election, and state representatives in Wisconsin and Michigan were pressured to do just that. They claimed the law allowed so-called rogue electors to substitute their own views for the will of the voters. They recruited people in multiple states to send in fraudulent votes and slates. My proposal here and the bipartisan work that you have done would guard against efforts like those by ensuring that candidates can go to federal court to stop rogue governors from sending invalid electoral votes. They also plan to force debate and votes on objections to 6 states' electoral votes. And that's when I think everyone learned just one senator and one congressman, if to get joined together, can actually gum up the proceeding. I remember Senator Blunt and I realizing it was going to take at least 24 hours before we even knew the insurrection was coming our way. And as Senator Collins just pointed out to me, and as history has shown us, there have been other objections over the years, regardless of party. People can make objections. No one's suggesting we stop them from speaking out. It's just that there's got to be a minimum that makes sense before Congress would step in and delay the counting of the electoral vote. I will never forget, as I said, what happened that day. I don't think any of us will. And it is time to make sure that we reform this bill. As I noted, Senator King Durbin and I released draft legislation. This great bipartisan group was put together, led by Senator Collins and Senator Manchin. Senator Blunt and I have met with the bipartisan group. We've engaged with them multiple times, including with our staff's assistance, and they worked for months to get consensus. They did. As these discussions have progressed, consensus has emerged that any reforms to the Electoral Count Act must address at least 4 key issues, which I've already mentioned: the vice president issue, the number of people objecting, the threshold, the way the slates could be picked at the last minute after an election is done, and then finally the process of making sure you can head into court if necessary. I want to make clear that since the 2020 election, when more Americans voted than ever before during a global pandemic, we've seen a tidal wave of voter suppression laws. I appreciate the work Senator Manchin and a group of us did together trying to fix that. I still hope we can get some of those reforms done in the future.